Good afternoon, everyone. We are just going to start in about 30 seconds or so. We want to give people a chance to come on in the room. All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Shakima Appleton, and I am the Vice President of Webinar Programming for Philly SHRM. And we want to thank you for joining today's session, The Self-Aware HR Leader. Today's presentation will be facilitated by Dan Gallagher, founder and CEO of Gallagher Leadership. Be sure to stick around until the end to hear from past president of Philly SHRM and president of JLHR Solutions, Jackie Linton, speak on our new initiative, the Lift Lab. So without further ado, I'll pass the presentation over to Dan.
Thanks so much, Shakima. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session. I'm going to pull my screen up here. Excited to have the hour with you today, and so thank you very much for your time and interest. I'm going to start with a quick story that actually is relevant to our local hometown here. When I was a second-year student at St. Joseph's University, my intro to Soc teacher asked us to go to the Barnes Foundation, which at that point was literally across the street from campus. And we were in a class called Social Norms that was focused on studying people. And so our task was to go to one of the great museums of the world and not look at the paintings, but rather look at the people looking at the paintings. And as a second-year student, often termed as a sophomore, which means wise fool, I didn't know what it meant at that point in time. I accomplished the paper and that was all good. But later in life, as I started to really focus on leadership development and self-awareness, I very much realized and appreciated that exercise became a metaphor for self-awareness and self-aware leadership specifically, in that we, in our journey of getting things done, get her done, right? We have this visual of a painting in front of us, and that painting could be a deadline, it could be a task, it could be our to-do list, it could be a quota or a budget item or a milestone. And that painting is so meaningful to us. But just as Barnes organized the museum, that painting is surrounded by other paintings. And so when you step back from the painting, you can focus on one, but you can see many. And just like the intro to sociology exercise that I had to go through, it wasn't just about looking at the paintings, it was about watching the people in the room and what the norms were and who would talk to each other and who would stand close to each other and who wasn't in the room. And that metaphor became a definition of self-awareness for me, which is simply slowing yourself down to speed yourself up, to literally take the step back from the painting and look at the other paintings and look at the other people and realize that it's not about procrastinating. It's not about missing a deadline, right? It's about collecting all the information so that you're informed, right? Because it is about slowing yourself down to speed yourself up, not slow yourself down to pause and not get things done on time. So today we're going to talk about how the self-aware leader model specifically applies to human resources. And for those of us that were at the Philly SHRM Symposium, there was a great day, a way to start the day around our CHRO panel. And what was fascinating, there were 4 CHRs on the panel, as well as a CHRO facilitating the panel. And all 5 of them talked about the importance of knowing the business. In fact, many of them actually held jobs outside of human resources. And so this became for us an opportunity to really build out our approach with the self-aware HR leader. And so we're going to talk about self-awareness not only as a general leadership skill, but also as a functional leadership skill. And as we go through this journey, we're going to encourage you to use the chat through the first part. And so you'll see that the first question is dropped in. Let's share a little bit about our favorite leadership read or listen, a podcast, a book, even a video that you're watching that's helping you stay focused on your own leadership lessons. And so we'll share some best practices there and give it a little bit of a nod on why it was a valuable resource. But as we go into the journey of understanding how self-awareness connects to HR, I remember sitting once, this was about 4 or 5 years ago, with a CHRO of a large global retailer. And she said, look, our number one responsibility in HR is to drive discretionary effort and engagement so that the business continues to grow. And when I think about that definition, discretionary effort is, okay, there's minimum effort needed. Discretionary effort's how much more you're going to go over and beyond that, right? And engagement is the emotional connection then you have not only to the work, but the employer. It all started to make sense because surrounding everything, right? Surrounding everything is our business strategy, and that influences the customer experience. Whether you are the Barnes Foundation and your customers are members or guests, or whether you are a commercial enterprise that produces products and or services, right? All of us have a business plan that we're surrounded by, and all of us have some sort of customer interaction. Inside of that is the people strategy and the employee experience. And so when you look at the middle kind of building up, kind of a different version of Maslow hierarchy of needs here, right? You start with, how do you drive discretionary and effort and engagement? First, the person wants to be here. Second, they feel like they belong. Third, they want to do their best. And then fourth, that discretionary effort comes from you're hungry for more. And so when you think about this model, there's a direct link, right? And people continuously do this work of directly linking the customer experience and the employee experience. And so how does that relate to what we're focused on? Well, LinkedIn, and we're going to drop the link into the chat here. LinkedIn put out a study this year of the top skills. So they had like 7 to 10 top skills that they listed. But I found it really fascinating because their skill of the moment is what they called it, right? The skill of the moment of most in demand is adaptability. Okay, so adaptability can mean a lot of different things, but just kind of simplifying it, it's like if you're presented with something and that something changes, right? Then how do you respond to that? Makes sense, right? Self-awareness is stepping back from that painting and recognizing that the change is happening before it happens. And I just had breakfast this morning, actually, with our Philly SHRM friend Jamil Rush, former president, and we were talking about that the world feels to be playing a lot more offense coming out of the last 4 years and 5 years, whether it was around COVID or the need for more racial justice or the economics or the health or the work remote. The world seems to be playing much more offense today. And so when you think about adaptability and you think about the self-aware HR leader, you can sit there and wait for the response. That's playing defense. And look, we need good defensive players. But if you want to be self-aware and lean into reinventing, then you're going to play offense. And part of that offense means you're anticipating what you need next before you need it. So let me pause there, and we're going to have two main guests jump in. Jackie Linton, former president as well of Philly SHRM, and she's going to share a little bit more about LiftLab on the back end. But Jackie, any thoughts around, kind of the kickoff here around the function of the self-aware leader and specifically HR?
Thanks, Dan. Honestly, I feel like some of the things you've already mentioned are aspects of playing offense. The self-aware leader needs to be able to look around the corner at what's coming down the pike from a business perspective. And then what is the impact on our function? And then how can we then influence that? How can we make it better? How can we minimize the risk? What kind of things can we do? But it's all about looking around the corner at what's coming rather than waiting for it to get there.
Yeah, it's funny, Jackie, you say that because I've used the step back from the Barnes Foundation example to explain, but the other one that I have that talks about the definition of self-awareness is actually around being in a traffic jam, right? In a traffic jam, you can sit there and look at taillights. You can be in the third floor and look at the around the corner, or you can actually be up in Sky Chopper 6, right? And get a more peripheral view of what's going on. So, how have you seen this kind of play out in your HR career relative to like, what's an example for you of looking around the corner?
Yeah, so for instance, an organization develops a new strategy, and it's a little different than way they've always done things, but they don't necessarily think about how that's going to get implemented from a people perspective. Well, the self-aware leader would be able to step in, understanding where the organization is trying to go, and developing strategies that are going to help the talent to get there, whether or not that's helping people, having the right people, getting more people, getting access to resources. Those are the kind of things that are different and new than what they've currently been doing. So that's an example. Forecasting,
Yep.
is another way of doing it.
Yeah, workforce planning is so critical, right? And even just to your point, Jackie, like framing it differently. So let's use that as a benchmark. What I'm going to do is first, I'm going to introduce you to the self-aware leader model, right? And really at a high level. And then we're going to take each of the 4 pillars and look at it through being an HR professional lens. Through each of the steps, we're going to have a couple of different chats that drop in. So please continue with the chats here. And we'll make some good conversation there. And then we'll have questions, time for live questions at the end. But feel free to ask questions along the way as well in the chat, because I'll be paying attention as we go along here. So let's go into the model. So think about Barnes, think about stepping back from the painting. Okay, why are we stepping back from the painting? Well, if you focus on the painting, you can crank your to-do list, right? You can execute and you can even crush it in that space, right? What each of us are trying to do is create a value proposition to the organization that we work for, whether again, it's a nonprofit or a for-profit. Each of us are paid some sort of salary and we're asked to create value, and hopefully that value exceeds what we're being paid and we create positive impact. And so you think about, okay, well, to Jackie's point, if you're looking around the corner, what are you trying to lean into, right? And the model starts with the red triangle in the middle, which is reinvention. Reinvent self, reinvent others, reinvent the business. These are 3 types of reinventions that you should have in your portfolio all the time, but you get to prioritize which one is most important to you now. It creates focus for you in a different way. So let's unpack what they are. Reinvent self is I'm good at the blue things and I'm going to now grow at the red things, right? I'm good at the in-person elements. I want the synchronous elements. I want to be better at the asynchronous. Or I used to work in accounting and now I work in HR, right? There are different ways to reinvent yourself so that you are staying ahead of the curve around skills needed, experiences needed, and the kind of flip side of that is not becoming a dinosaur. So reinvent self is a focus on looking in the mirror and saying, what do I need to grow into next? If you're approaching reinvent self proactively, you're again anticipating what you need before someone comes knocking on your door saying, hey, we kind of needed this skill in your role 6 months ago. It's not showing up, right? So you're playing offense in that space. Reinvent others is servant leadership, right? It is, and we're going to throw a chat in here. I love to do this exercise. Reinvent others is the best grade school or high school teacher or coach you ever had. Done this exercise with folks 100 times a year, if you will. And it's really great to see people's faces light up and remembering the actual name. Mine was Mr. Jack Ura. He was my 8th grade teacher. He made us do a presentation every Friday. We used to hate him for it. And I would tell you today that I am not doing what I am doing today had it not been for Mr. Ura putting me on this path. And so thank you, Miss Justice. And let's get some other names up there to show some love to those teachers and coaches. They were way more invested in your success. Reinvent Others is way more invested in your success than their own. They found their own joy and success through you, right? Thank you, Mr. Kevin Marsh, Mrs. Brown, Mrs. Girardi, right? You know, these people lit it up for you. Reinvent the business is you've got this widget at home, and if you turn it this way, you'll cut your production time by 12.5% and increase your margins by 3.5%. It is faster, better, cheaper. It is what the great for-profits and the great nonprofits think about, because you need resources to grow. You need resources to serve. And so reinvent the business is actually thinking about how are you going to grow the business, add value, serve your folks in a different way. And so again, you keep all three in your portfolio all the time, but it's very intentional that you think about one and prioritizing one over the others. Through the research that I did with Ron Dufresne, Dr. Ron Dufresne and Dr. Lucy Ford from St. Joseph's University, we validated the 4 behaviors that actually feed self-awareness. What we're going to do now is cover those 4 behaviors and through the lens of being a self-aware HR leader. So let's go with the first one. So the first pillar is called the above average support system and network. On the surface, this can feel a little bit like running for student council or how many likes did I get on my post last night. That is not at all the case. Your support system is about who's going to lift you up when you need it and when you need it most, right? And your network is about who will help you in a timely manner. It's not about, hey, I just posted this on LinkedIn and I got 437 likes. It is truly about if you called that person and said, I need a 10-minute favor in the next 24 hours, will they make the space to help you, right? That's a big difference between will they pop a like onto your post. So it is kind of playing into this mantra of, to some degree, it is about who you know, right? And so through each of these slides, when we go through the 4 behaviors, we're going to take one, or through the 4 pillars, I'm sorry, we're going to take one of the behaviors. Each pillar has 6 validated behaviors below it that support what being great at that pillar looks like. For the purposes of our learning today, we're going to focus on one to connect the definition of the pillar to the examples. So when you look at the behavior 1C, at work, I know a lot of important people outside of my immediate department, right? And this is so critically valuable, and Jackie talked about it, because when you look around the corner, it's just not around the HR corner, it's around the organizational corner. And when you think about relationships that you have, right, you're likely to have more work done with people that you have a positive relationship. And so this plays into not just about who you know, but whether or not you have a strong enough relationship that you can. I used to work at Comcast for almost 20 years, and we had a CFO at one point, and he used to say, like, the hardest thing to do is to rally large groups of people together in concert. This is how you can rally people together in concert, when you have relationships outside of your immediate department. All right. So what's an example or two of pillar 1 in action, right? And I thought about examples that I've talked to other people about or experienced in my own career. And some of the examples went like super well, and some of them were like swing and a miss and a big learning. Launching individual development plans, right? Now, we've all been through exercises where we launch an HR product, right? But if you take the product mindset, success isn't defined by implementation. That's when HR takes it and pushes it to market. Maybe it's posted up on your LMS or your HRIS or your intranet. That's just the first piece, right? That's, for example, if you were in product development, marketing, and sales, right? That's your go-to-market approach, but you haven't sold, you haven't put any points on the board. And so with a product mindset, you not only think about launching IDPs in terms of implementation and having success there, but you measure success around adoption, right? Adoption, not just in terms of completion of, oh, they posted, this many people posted an IDP or did an IDP in the system, right? But also look at the employee engagement scores of those that did an IDP versus those that didn't. Look at the performance scores. And so you can pull it through to other measures that allow you to not just connect the HR work to HR projects to HR measures, but rather take it and pull it through to how does it influence discretionary effort and engagement. The second example, I try to use a diverse pool of examples from various aspects of the HR function, would be a parental leave and or work remote policy. And that work is co-authored by HR, and we're going to call it the field, or a business owner outside of HR. And so when you think about, again, adoption, how does your network allow you to go to market with more gusto, with more buy-in up front, and help you think about not just in terms of, can I get the project done, right? But more so around what's the pull through and how can I create upside for the organization, upside around performance, upside around culture, because the adoption is there tied to the success. So that kind of gives you a sense of, when you play defense with your support system and network, right? You wait for moments where you're stuck. You wait for moments where you get assigned a task and you're like, okay, I got this due by next Thursday. How do I push it over the finish line? I've got to reach out to someone. In a self-aware HR leader mode, you play offense by stepping back from the painting and you look at your portfolio of work and you're like, okay, if everything goes well, who do I need to lean on to scale my work, right? What kind of relationship do I have with them? If I reach out to them to help them champion my work, will they lean into that? And you start to almost do like a stakeholder analysis here of who do you need to nurture a relationship with versus who do you already have a relationship with. I had a mentor of mine, and she was an HR lead of a business unit. And Grace always used to say, you need to have one ally and one champion in every business unit, so that you could basically always dip into someone that was going to tell you what people are really thinking of the work that you're responsible for feeding into that organization. And I think about that often with this, because you really can lose focus on developing your network, right? Last point I'll say is, like, the metaphor I use often when I'm working within this pillar specifically is, how many bars do you have on your phone, right? Think about how that slows you down at times if you're not getting full reception. Developing your support system and network is activating and operating with full bars, right? If you throw me in Philadelphia into any Wawa, I will walk in and probably run into somebody that I know, because I grew up here, I went to school here, I've worked here, etc. You know, you throw me into Dallas and I'm going to know like 2 people there, right? And so it's about how quickly can you activate your network to move the work forward, and how are you nurturing that in a proactive fashion. All right, let's go to pillar 2 here. I'm sorry, we didn't throw the question. Let's throw the chat in for pillar 1. What function, not title, what function outside of HR is most important to you, for you to have a relationship with? And that's a selfish decision based on what you're responsible for, so it'll be different for everybody. There's not a right answer here, is the other way of saying it. Why is that functional relationship important to you? And this question that we're asking right now feeds right into pillar 2, which is critical and systems thinking. Finance, there we go. So critical and systems thinking, the definition up on the slide here is critical thinking asks questions about the status quo, right? Systems thinking connects it to other functions and other areas of the business. So I love to use the example that critical thinking, I look at this wall and I'm like, yeah, the paint job is good, but it would look better if it had one more coat. I'm constantly, and even when I put that next coat on it, I'm going to sit there and say, oh, this next coat looks good. That's the critical thinking. The systems thinking is, when I paint this wall, that wall doesn't look as good, right? And when I paint that wall, the ceiling doesn't look as good. And when I finish this room, the room next to it doesn't look as good. And so critical and systems thinking is recognizing that everything operates in an ecosystem together. And if I push a lever in my world, somewhere upstream or downstream, it pulls someone else's lever. And so part of the anticipation, the stepping back from the painting here, and looking at the other pictures and looking at the other people in the room is, from a behavioral standpoint, you're thinking about, yeah, it's great to think about my ideas tend to change people's minds. That's the people side of it, right? But the work side of it is recognizing, am I creating any surprises, or am I creating any adverse effects for folks that are upstream, downstream from me, right? So when you think about community affairs and communications, or operations and maintenance, some of the functions that are coming up in chat, right? It's not just about you have a great relationship. It's not just about that your ideas tend to change people's mind. It's about your work fuels their work and is seen as an add lifting up their work, and not timed poorly, right? Or a distraction for what you need, for what the business really wants the folks to prioritize on, right? I was working with a group the other day, and they timed year-end reviews with the end of a quarter. Like, the final discussions were timed with the end of a fiscal quarter, and then they got frustrated when the sales team didn't get their reviews done in the week that was assigned. Well, that's bad scheduling, right? You need to keep the calendar free for your sales team the last 2 weeks of a quarter if you're in a business that leans on last minute pushes to close out the quarter successfully. And so 2 examples that I came up with here were really around, one was compliance training, and using inclusive language is one piece, so that you can reflect your entire employee population in using things like gender neutral pronouns. But the other side of it would be to study not just completions and time to completion, right? Hey, we protected the company with compliance training, and last year it took the average employee this amount of time. This year it took us this amount of time. But how does that influence escalations? How does that influence open door policy? What about legal spend tied to those things, right? You can start to now create a business case study around the impact, and you're working cross-functionally. You're not just working within HR, you're working within finance and legal, et cetera, communications, as this example I pointed to before. The second example is hiring practices. And look, there's so much more focus on the candidate experience as the labor pool becomes smaller and tighter, and we're all competing for folks. I am deeply obsessed with the retention and the experience of folks that are not hired, right, and not interviewed, right? In the end, think about, if you're part of an organization, the number of people that apply and either get a form letter back, or the number of people that get an interview and internally may not hear why they weren't advanced in the process. They were itchy for a reason, right? They were itchy enough to hit apply for this job for a reason within the company. And so there's so much focus that goes to, okay, who got the job? What's their onboarding practice? How do we backfill their role if they were internal, et cetera? I think that HR has an opportunity to care more for, what does it mean that this person actually has applied for 7 jobs in the last year? Wait, how is that influencing their productivity and what they're doing today? Is the business at risk at all if that person left? Are there 10 of the 15 people in that group applying for jobs regularly? What does that say about the leader of that team? Right now, you start to tell a story here that creates the systems thinking and critical thinking of, like, okay, we're constantly looking to upgrade talents. We're constantly looking to upgrade performance. We're constantly looking to upgrade culture. But every time we try to push someone forward, there's someone as well that may not be getting the love. So let me pause there. Lindsay, I'd love to get Lindsay. Lindsay and I've worked together a handful of times before. And what's really cool about Lindsay's experience is that she's worked both in the operations, in marketing leadership roles, but also in talent roles. I'd love to get your take on these first 2 pillars, kind of building off of what Jackie and I were kind of positioning around the role and the function of HR.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. And sitting here as with experience in the marketing space and also in the talent space, the two go so hand in hand. When you think about marketing, your job is to create ideas that change people's minds. And I've learned really quickly that having a great idea that you think is a great idea or that your team thinks is a great idea doesn't go anywhere without being able to create that influence within the network and getting that adoption from the people around you. So when you sit in the talent space, essentially what you're doing is marketing those ideas, but also trying to change people's minds and finding out what their why is, focusing on why would this affect their larger system, and not just getting people who nod and smile and then go back to their desk and focus on what they're doing day to day, but saying, okay, this matters and this matters to my business and here's why.
Yeah. That why is it's a unique moment, right? Because you walk into the conversation with your own why, right? Like, I mean, again, similar to marketing, right? You're going to market with a message that you want to try to fill the marketplace with, right? But it's also about meeting the consumers where their needs are, right? So how does that show up from a self-awareness perspective in your eyes, Lindsay?
Yeah, I mean, you can come up with the greatest product, and if it doesn't fill the need of someone, they're not purchasing it. So the understanding that you can continue to push and you continue to push, but if you're not solving for that problem, then it doesn't matter how great the idea is or even how great your network is. They might support you, but they're not going to be your champion. They're not going to go to bat for you. They're not going to continue to help you sell.
Yeah, and that starts to build us into the third and fourth pillar. But the push versus pull from a self-awareness perspective is so critical, right? Like there's moments where, gosh, you know that it's the right way to go, right? And maybe you need to drive that forward and get people on board through a push. But there's other times where it's more effective to sit there and ask questions and have them come to the same idea that you have in your back pocket. You know that that's the outcome that you want to receive, but you're looking for it to come from their voice. Thanks, Lindsay. All right, pillar 3, savvy perspective, the political landscape. And so you can see how this plays into exactly what Lindsay was just talking about. The way that I love to define this is that all work has 2 elements, people and tasks. People make the work political, and all work is political. It might be simple, or it might be complex in its politicalness. But when you look at the behavior, it starts to make sense. And again, this is intentionally focusing on the relationship side. I know who to influence to get the most desirable work assignments. So start to play out these behaviors together. Right? And you see the chat that just came in. What's the number one reason people are hesitant to use their voices? Right? So think about this. At work, I know a lot of important people outside of my immediate department. Behavior 1C, behavior 2A. My ideas tend to change people's minds, right? Tied to critical and systems thinking. Now we're into, I know who to influence in order to get the most desirable work assignments. That's not even getting the work done. That's getting to be a part of the work. And so when you think about, what's the number one reason people are hesitant to use their voice with others, I'm curious to hear people's thoughts on not necessarily why you hesitate, but maybe based on your view of the organization from sitting in HR, why do others hesitate to use their voice? Is it all based on politics or fear of being rejected? Thank you, Jackie. Fear of reaction from leadership. Thanks, Lindsay. When you look at the savvy perspective, the political landscape, that's where stepping back from that painting helps you, because you can see where power resides. You can see where momentum resides. You can see where barriers reside. You're not just in the mode of looking at one painting and saying, boom, check, my job is to get the work done, right? And in those of us that really strive on psychological safety, thanks, Senna, the fear of silence, yes, for sure. When you look at many of us build our momentum as a leader around execution, and what self-awareness, slowing yourself down to speed yourself up around these political landscapes, is truly about. Don't just focus on execution, because you could go too fast, right? You've been a part of those email chains where people replied to all too quickly. You've been a part of those meetings where somebody said something that they really should have only thought. And so it is about sitting there and saying, full speed on the gas all the time doesn't always work. And so the examples that came up with here, right? Right, not sharing could create a status quo. You know, we haven't seen any change from this. Thanks, Dr. Joe. And so 2 examples, right? Performance management, right? Not just getting through the cycle, but think about exercises that more and more will be done across every organization, where you map ratings out and you map merits out, and it focuses on how does that distribution or that calibration play out across race, gender, and tenure, right? Is there differentiation in how those that identify as a man versus a woman versus what about tenure, right? I really get obsessed with tenure because I think we bring in outside resources to bring a different point of view, different industry experience, and then they come into the organization and they're like, you don't get how we do it here, right? So how does that influence performance ratings and then merit increases? You know, more and more HR teams are starting to dig into those elements, and that can be political, right? It's not easy to sit down, but it is necessary to sit down with a leader of people and sit there and say, look, when we look at the last 2 instances of reviews between you and your team of 12, this is a theme that keeps popping, and our commitment to equity, inclusion, and belongingness means that we need to have a conversation about why is this? In the second part, the second example, you know, action planning in response to an employee opinion survey that not only impacts culture, but looks at performance, right? And so when you think about employee opinion surveys, it's important, especially that we're not chasing like an eNPS score, right? When you read the research on eNPS, right, it'll tell you that the most important question is not that on a scale of 1 to 10, are you likely to recommend us as an employer? The most important question is the why. And what are the themes and the patterns that pop in the why that allow you to have a conversation with that business leader or that business unit that allow you to navigate the power, the politics. And so being savvy around that is important. We all have worked side by side with others of folks that just crank it and they miss these conversations, and leaning into these conversations, and or in our role within human resources, leaning into helping to make it safe for others to have these conversations amongst themselves is such a critical skill in how we advance the work. All right, let's see here. We're going to go into pillar 4 now, and this is, you can see how they all build off of each other, right? So we started with above average support system and network, right? And about who you have in your network. We'll go back with the visual. Then we go into the critical and systems thinking, more work-based, right? And how we work across functions, and we look to upgrade things, which is great. But when I upgrade something, if I launch something in marketing and I haven't told sales, right, it can make each other look silly. And then you get into, okay, well, if I'm going to have this balanced approach around the political landscape, it means that I'm not going to call someone's baby ugly, right? I'm going to have the meeting before the meeting and care for not surprising or embarrassing anyone in the meeting, even though I have this really cool idea. In fact, based on my ideas around relationships, and the first one about our support system network, to nurture that relationship, I'm going to go to market with my idea with the person that's most likely to be impacted by it. So it's not just about me, it's about we. And that leads us into courageous drive for Magis. Magis is a term that means more for the good of others, and it's about prioritizing the team win over the individual win. There are optics around the Magis, and there is intent, and they're very different, right? Because you can have all the greatest of intentions in the world around trying to help and serve others, but if people see what you're doing and the optics of it are seen as self-serving, they're not as likely to lean in. And so part of this is, again, before you step on the gas, realizing that you have an opportunity to engage and include others in how you think about moving the work forward. Is it more about you being the name on the back of the jersey, or you being the name on the front of the jersey? And specifically the behavior here, 4D, is creating good for others that outweighs personal sacrifices I have to make. I remember a huge learning I had once in this, where I had a leader, an executive leader from a different group than what I was in, and she was much more senior to what I was. And I was pitching her an idea over a cup of coffee, and she literally came to me and said, "I love this idea. Are you okay if I take it and run with it?" And I, in the moment, like, she was a coach and a mentor, and so I trusted her and I felt safe with her. And her point was, I think we can get momentum, but I need to be able to, like, co-own this with you, or even just have it be coming from my voice. And I felt like she taught me the value of making personal sacrifice. And I'm grateful to Charisse for that lesson, because earlier in my career, I would have been selfish, more selfish, right? I would have wanted to have a piece of that pie and move it forward. And I realized that sometimes it's more about the idea moving forward than it is about the idea linked to me moving forward. Yes, totally nice. And that's what the key is, because going back to the model, thank you, Marissa, she was part of my support system and network. So I could be vulnerable with her and I could feel safe with her, but she was also a champion in protecting me. And so it all played into the model. So those are the 4 lessons that we focus on. And when I think about this 4th one, I actually use a term called generosity quotient, which is your capacity, your ability, and your willingness to give. So kind of in celebration of Charisse and the example that I shared, I'd love for you to share in the chat an example where you've seen success as a result of leaders exercising their generosity quotient in being a giver, right? And for many of you, if you haven't seen Adam Grant's book, Give or Take, there's some great focus in there around the power of giving. But an example where someone's leaning into giving as a leadership tactic, right, as a leadership strategy, is a valuable thing, because when you think about going back to the visual of the model, right, it starts to positively shade all 3 of the other pillars. If people see you as a good person and trying to feed the full team, they will want to join your network, right? If people see you as a good person feeding the team, they will want to lean into your ideas, no matter how different they might be. And if people see you as being a good person and leading into the team, they will help you navigate power and politics. And so this list of pillars is not a finite list where each of them are separate. They are all interconnected. And that information behind this is what you gather from stepping back from the painting and slowing yourself down. All right. So we're coming up on 15 minutes to go. I want to give some time for Jackie on the back end. So we've got about 10 minutes. Shakima, I'd love to open up for some questions here. And I'd also love to, while we're doing that, throw in the chat our question of what's your number 1 takeaway from today's session and why is it valuable? And then I'll pull up a slide as well that can put some summary points on for you. So we're going to open up the lines, and if anybody wants to ask a question, just unmute and say hello and fire away. Number 1 lesson in the chat, questions on the audio.
Hey, Dan. I don't know if this is as much a question as it is a comment. I am really struck by how this program really speaks the language of business, and it kind of really creates a whole different kind of dialogue. Can you speak a little bit more about like how that gets integrated into like the whole business processes, how people see you and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Like when you think about core HR tasks or responsibilities, not tasks, responsibilities to the business, right? So think about, we're all walking into the same room. Let's use hiring someone. It's super simple, right? When you look at hiring someone, if in the end, the idea is you're walking into the room where there was a seat that's empty, and your part of the play is to work with the hiring manager to fill the seat. And when you think about the simplest approach of that task, it's like, okay, find a way to get someone in that seat, manage your average time to fill. But when you think about the holistic approach, gosh, you can like, was that a mistake to repost the job description exactly as it was? Is this an opportunity to frame the job differently, to hire different skills that the team doesn't have, right? Are we better off finding an internal talent that's going to be here and quick and transition in 2 weeks, or would an external point of view? In the end, the more that you can start to shift your mind, to your point, Jackie, to what's going to drive performance, right? Is that leader of people managing a team where they don't have a successor? And is there a responsibility of that hiring manager to sit there and say, look, you want to grow your career? Guess what? We need you to lock in who your successor is, because now you'll have 4 to 6 months to train them before you get promoted and leave and go into a different group.
Mm-hmm. That's
That's
great.
that's where the business edge helps people. And so going back to one of the earlier questions we had, like if you lean primarily on HR voices to shape your work, you won't always walk into the room through the door of the business lens, right? It'll be harder. And that's where that, Grace's feedback to me was have an ally and a champion in every group, so that you can sit there and say, like, why, before I go ahead and start this project, why will people resent me for doing this work? Let me see a couple chats. Jackie, does that help answer and comment on your comment?
Yes, totally. I saw another comment in the chat that I actually commented on too. We don't often think about the behaviors that would elevate a department or increase their effectiveness in some way. And so when we have an opportunity to change something, thinking about what that might look like is also something I think is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, Senna, thanks for prompting that point. I love that. And this is part of the exercise of all work comes down to people or tasks, right? And then when you look at how we set expectations and or build goals and or measure performance, right? Are you measuring results or behaviors, right? And a little tweak in behaviors can create a huge tweak in results. To that point, think about the last time that you've shadowed someone. Like there's so many people that focus on, when they think about learning at work, they focus on training. Shadowing is one of the most valuable things you can do as an HR professional, right? Go sit side by side with someone as they're doing the work, not to do an audit, not to do a time and motion study, but to truly see the work through their eyes, right? And to truly feel what they feel. I remember working once in a call center environment and doing a shadowing experience, and my awe was like how quickly folks could pivot across multiple screens and multiple systems to satisfy a customer. And in that moment of awe, I gained empathy for how they were navigating, but I also gained, when I stepped back from the painting, knowledge to go back to the team that was building the tools and saying, like, we've got people swiveling way too much. Like, how do we bring this all together and make it simpler for people, right? And so thus the journey begins of thinking about the work. Another thing that I had relative to this last point around Courageous Drive for the Magis was, part of generosity quotient is like, giving people access, giving people visibility, second chance. I remember being part of one experience where a company flipped their model on 401k enrollment. And their model was, hey, we've got a X% match. People are eligible to join at such point, and they have to opt in. And I remember the model started to change to people got auto-enrolled. And the whole idea was that the company was looking at the trends of the data and saying that their employees, and specifically some of their frontline employees, were not accessing the opportunity to grow wealth, right? And they felt like it was important to spend time and change policy to create opportunity there, that even if you weren't going to contribute, you could flip a switch and turn this on and get company contributions to that. Like, those are great examples where lean into what are you learning from looking at the data, and really think about how to create momentum over time. You'll get a copy of the deck afterwards. And so this is a simple visual that helps you think about, like, okay, how does each pillar apply to each reinvention? And so let me just give you kind of my top 6 moments here of what I would emphasize as we kind of wrap up. Oh, question, here we go. Do you have any advice for balancing Courageous Drive for Magis versus getting recognition and credit you deserve? Yes, great question. Part of this is there are moments where you can get credit that may not be in the moment, but may be reflecting on the moment. An example would be like, I've seen more and more people. Yes, there are way too many people that take and we can get into gender and race and tenure and everything else that starts to influence that in a negative way. In the moment, right? It's part of figuring out, what does a win look like for you, and balancing. You get to decide what the balance is. How much of it is about credit for you? How much of it is about the work moving forward? But I find that more and more people, whether they're asked for it in their review cycles or not, or even doing it quarterly on their own, where they're writing self-reflections that they're submitting to their manager in HR of like, here's what I would want to be recognized for as adding value this quarter. Because sometimes if you wait for the end of the year, it doesn't help manage your brand, and it doesn't, to your point, other people are taking credit. So I think it's important to have conversations where you feel like you're being left out of getting credit. But I realize that those are political, and but that's what defines culture, right? Culture is defined not only by what we lift up as values, but culture is also defined by the behaviors that we allow to have happen that we know aren't so great. So I'm happy to talk more offline with trying to see the individual that had that. I think it was Marissa. Yeah, great question, Marissa. I think we're up on time with questions. Was there any other that I missed? Alex, glad you like the champion and the ally. So the final thought here, and then pass it over to you, Jackie. Be more self-aware by slowing yourself down to speed yourself up, right? Take 60 seconds, save the email in draft, and look at it again in the morning and send it out in the morning. Embrace that all work can be broken down into people and tasks, recognizing that the people are what makes things political. If you look at an exercise of the 10 people that influence your success the most, if a relationship becomes a barrier, right? How do you start to mend that relationship so that you're not struggling on the task because of the relationship? Anticipate your next reinvention, self, others, or the business before you're asked. Align your value proposition to business priorities. Like, lean into what is the next wave of growth for your organization. Lean into what is a more profitable set of team members or a more profitable set of products. Lean into moments that challenge outdated models, and then connect the EX and the CX. both in your thinking, your mindset, your words, your actions, helping others do the same. That's what I would recommend as we kind of summarize that. So feel free to reach out to me through LinkedIn or through my email. Proud to have all book proceeds go to City Year. Big fan, been involved with them for almost 20 years and just totally admire what they do for Philadelphia and so many other cities. And with that, I'm going to toss over to Jackie.
Great. Thanks, Dan. I just want to, Shakima, can you put the slide up for me, please? Thank you. Just in case you guys are not really, or still have some questions, I want to remind you that we will be having an open house where we will be fielding questions, any questions that you may have on April 16th. Now you can actually, put your questions in the registration process so that we'll have them in advance, or you can bring them to the session and we'll answer the questions there. It's going to be about a half hour. We will be recording it. But if you still have questions, I invite you to take some time to visit that. And so if you know already the value of this program and are ready to register, I could not agree with you more. Dan has introduced us to the pillars of the self-aware leader, and we are really excited about the opportunities that these will bring for us as HR leaders. Every time I hear these concepts, I always learn something new. And this Lift Lab program is based on the self-aware leader, but it's focused on application for HR leaders. So there's a heavy dose of not just learning, but learning and doing, so that you can walk away with something that you can do like right away. I'm excited that about the impact that this program can have for us. And what is most exciting for me is it kind of helps us to learn this new language, this language of business, so that we are seen differently by others and we can contribute at a much higher level. So if you're ready to register now, I invite you to do that. Space is limited. We want this to be a very intimate experience for people. And if you're not yet ready, be sure to sign up for the Q&A on April 16th. Shakima?
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you, Dan, for this informative presentation here. And I want to remind you all that you are eligible to receive 1 HR Business HRCI credit and 1 SHRM Professional Development credit for attending today's webcast. You will receive a follow-up email about a week after this webcast once you complete the survey link. The link must be completed, the survey must be completed for you to receive the certificate for your credits. And once again, I want to thank all of you for joining us for today's webcast. And on behalf of Philly SHRM, enjoy your afternoon.